Hello there. Welcome to Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. On the 27th of May this year, that's on Children's Day to be precise, President Muhammadu Buhari signed into law the 2019 budget of 8.9 trillion naira. It was 2 days before his inauguration for another 4 years, in which many Nigerians will expect that his government will take them to the next level, which was the promise of his re-election campaign. Now, one of the areas where they will be hoping to feel government's presence will be in the area of infrastructure development. However, looking at the ratio of capital versus recurrent expenditure, and then digging further to how much is earmarked in the budget for a critical ministry like power, works and housing, do the people really have cause to hope for better? This evening, we take a look at infrastructure development and funding, with particular attention to the subsection of works, which covers the building and maintenance of roads and bridges across the country. My guest tonight is Honorable Toby Okechukwu, a 7th member of the House of Representatives from Enugu State, who has also been re-elected for another 4 years. He's a member of the People's Democratic Party and the current chairman of the House Committee on Works. Toby Okechukwu, welcome to Hard Copy.
Thank you, Maokwe.
Now, I find it interesting that there's been a merger of the Ministry of Power, Works and Housing, but no such corresponding merger on the committees that oversee that particular ministry in both the House and the Senate. Was there a reason for that?
Well, you know that merger was an action taken by Mr. President.
Yeah.
And the House, in its wisdom, had some operational committees, and they decided to retain that. But in terms of activities, the power works and housing, they still retain their different scope of work. You deal with power, you deal with works, that is roads, then you deal with housing.
Because I'm trying to imagine for things like budget defense and oversight. I mean, do you have to call every time? I think oftentimes the minister is asked to appear to defend the budget for say the power works and housing. Now, because you're not together, do you hold like a joint defense session, or do you hold individual defense sessions? Just wondering.
Yeah, in the main, we held a joint defense, of the budget for the minister. It was an understanding we had.
Okay. Except
where there are certain circumstances that will require a particular focus on an issue. You can invite the minister separately.
Okay.
But in the main, we had joint sittings for budget defense.
In terms of how that works, would you recommend that the House and the Senate, develop a committee for power, works and housing? Or would you say they still break it down from your experience? No,
I think you should retain the present nomenclature of breaking it down,
okay,
of having works, having power, and having housing.
Okay.
Because essentially their responsibilities are quite distinct. There isn't any link between, you can say works and housing, but power is quite distinct. If, for instance, if you say transportation, generally, you can look at having aviation, road sector, maritime, put together, and rail put together, and they just committee on transportation. But even at that, you still have subcommittees that will deal with it because it's quite large.
Okay. Now, you have had oversight responsibility for the works section of the Power, Works and House. I don't want to say Works Ministry because we've since moved from that. But how would you say your committee fared?
Well, we have, as a committee, toured parts of the country. And what you would observe in most parts of the country is the level of degradation is the same. You might have some responses in terms of soil situation, where roads degrade more in some parts than others. But the level of decadence in road network is quite the same. And the reason for that is not far-fetched. Because as a matter of fact, road funding in Nigeria is quite in a parlor state compared with what happens in other jurisdictions. So it's not rocket science why you have the level of dilapidation or decay in the sector as compared to what happens in other countries. So I would say just Separating soil conditions, the level of decay is the same.
What was your plan to try and overcome? I don't want to go into the National Road Fund yet, but in terms of what happens every year in the Ministry of Power Works and Housing, you do see any ray of hope in that particular area with earmarking more money? Because we noticed that there was an increase in how much was appropriated and even how much was spent on roads or on works in general in that ministry. But would you say it had a desired effect, so to speak, from what you noticed across the country?
Yeah, I would say it has desired effect. First and foremost, routinely, based on our oversight experiences, when the budget is proposed, we relate with the ministry and as well as relate with our leadership. And as a matter of fact, we have on 2 separate occasions made cases for improvement in the particularly road sector. For instance, as our last count in 2018, we had about 260 proposed, but it was reviewed up to 300-something billion. And this is based on the fact that, look, even at 340 billion is not enough to fund the road sector. There is a contractual commitment in the Ministry of Works up to 4 trillion. That is contract. If you start doing them today, it's 4 trillion. At the level of funding them at 340 billion, it will take you close to if you divide 300 by 4 trillion.
4 trillion by 340.
Exactly. It gives you close over 10 years. Now, unfortunately, in 2019, that has been downgraded to 229 billion because the capital budget has been reduced. And when you look at it, you now know that there is a huge challenge and that you can't depend on these fluctuations that come unevenly each year to fund the road sector. There should be some level of reliability. So even if you start funding at 300 per annum, it will take you over 3 years, over 10 years to complete all the commitments you have. Presently, as at the time we came in, there was a debt liability of over 300 billion. Now, if you budget 229 billion, it's not enough to pay your debt. So no matter the level of expertise or leadership you have in the ministry, it's not sufficient.
Well, I do know that when the minister came in, he talked about how it's no surprise why we are where we are in terms of roads. He said in the Ministry of Works, 18 billion, when Works was a standalone ministry, 18 billion was what was earmarked. I think that slide should go up for viewers to appreciate what he was talking about. 2016, the entire Ministry of Power Works and Housing got 433.4. I think Works got the biggest share of 260 billion. In 2017, it went up 529 billion. It was difficult to get the breakdown for the Ministry of Works and
2018.
What Works got for 2017, 2018, and even 2019 from the site, from the website. But we did get what the Ministry of Power Works and Housing got. So for 2017, it was 529 billion. 2018, 555.8 billion, and in 2019 there was an appreciable decrease in how much was allocated to the ministry.
A decrease of about 120 billion.
Yes, was there a reason for that?
Well, if you check 2015, for instance,
yes,
and you correlate it with 2019, you will observe there are transition years.
Okay. You would think that for transition years we'll spend more.
Well, for transition years, I mean, a lot of money goes to a lot of other things. You know, you have elections, you have to fund it, you have to fund security. A lot of other issues come, transition issues. But if you check, prior to 2015, there was almost 100 billion budgeted for years, for roads. And when you look at it properly, that 100 billion was at dollar exchange rate of 180. So if you correlate it to what you have subsequently, in 2016, when the Naira had actually gone down, it just amounts to the same thing. But what I'm trying to say is that 2015 and the review in and the correlation in 2019 shows that there is usually a downward trend. But actually 18 billion was very poor, and the minister was right. There is no way it cannot fund even up to 2 roads in Nigeria.
So it would seem that so far so good. Maybe we should look very critically at our election cycle. Is it a proposal that I know that during the time of President Goodluck Jonathan, he was proposing, is it a 7-year tenure for president? Some say it was 6 years. Is it something you look at, looking at how short our election cycle is and what effect it usually takes, what toll it takes on the economy, and even what we propose for ourselves and what we do for ourselves in those 4 years?
Well, because of the peculiarity of our environment, it might be wise looking at that dispassionately. Because if you want tenure and you are off for 6 years, your job is cut out for you. It could be helpful. But sometimes you try to cure one defect and you create another. What if at the end of 6 years, somebody wants to continue and begins to deal with the system as presently as constituted? He wants to run another tenure, or probably due to public pressure or partisan pressure. So I believe that it is something that requires our having a conversation on. Mm-hmm. It is not something you just, off the cuff and you get into it. Mm. But 6 years looks attractive. It cures a lot of challenges. It gets you focused. You are not going to beg anybody. And you are not going to be challenged by having to please people, because you have to come back. You'll be objective, dispassionate, and focused on, like a lesson, what your job is.
Well, I'm looking at a criticism from Budget, which is an NGO which follows the budget for many Nigerians. They had this very scathing criticism, not of your committee, but of the capital component of. They were very specific about the 2018 budget, but many people would say it applies generally to all our budgets. They talked about several opaque administrative items as capital projects, just to show up the percentage of capital component in the 2018 budget. They say that a recent analysis shows that approximately 744.48 billion, or 42% of the 1.73 trillion naira capital line items under the direct supervision of ministries, the MDAs, will go into administrative items, which include procurement of cars, retrofitting of government offices, training, consultancies, and what have you. They jumble all of that under capital expenditure. And then here Nigerians are looking at the capital expenditure and saying, oh, it's going up. We seem to be making progress, thinking that perhaps that's going into critical infrastructure funding. As someone who has oversight functions over, critical ministries like works, for instance, how do you ensure that money is efficiently spent on the things that really matter to Nigerians?
Well, thank you very much. As a matter of fact, the Ministry of Works cannot afford to undertake OPEC provisions, because essentially you simply have to do the roads, or you don't, or you do affiliated issues. So what will you be providing for? I mean,
if this criticism has not come for the Ministry of Power, Works and Housing, but in general, it has come for ministries, departments, and agencies, which members like you have oversight functions over. Is this something you have observed as well as somebody?
Of course, there are some. There are situations where, for instance, you repeatedly get you have MDAs, provide for computers. Each year, you see that come up. You see provisions like for training, and they are aligned to capital. You also see some provisions that actually you would need to interact with them to know. And these are the things we try to establish. But talking about capital, essentially, a situation where you service your debt with close to 3 trillion, and at the same time, your current expenditure is over 4 trillion, and then the balance is for capital, is lopsided already. So it's a huge challenge. And if you go on in that with that arrangement, there is no way the country can develop.
Now, one of the things that I think the Senate and the House came up with was a National Road Fund, which was greeted initially with a bit of controversy because a number of people imagined that there was going to be an increment in the price of fuel because of where the monies for that particular fund was going to come from. But the Senate, I think it was the Senate President who was saying that, oh, it's already inbuilt into the current monies that we're already paying. So how are you proposing that these monies will be taken out from the current monies already being paid by Nigerians at the pump stations for this National Road Fund?
Thank you, Mark. Actually, when we came in 2015, we looked at the entire sector. We had to deal with issues of governance in the road sector. We had to deal with the issue of funding in the road sector, and we had to deal with the issue of capacity. And we have approached the solution to road funding and road management in Nigeria through the governance model, funding model, and then the capacity level. And that was why we passed the FRA bill, Federal Roads Authority bill. We passed the Road Fund bill. We also passed the Current Act to make sure that you have sufficient capacity for Nigerian engineers to work. With regard to governance, we wanted an entity in the FRA that will have capacity to come to work, think about roads, and can act as a legal person and borrow funds and take funds from any sector, operate like a company. That was largely, and I'm happy that the Ministry of Works, for instance, you know, they were able to host the technical committee we set for this purpose, and comprising people from all the most ministries that had to do with funding and roads, including CBN, including Ministry of Justice, including Ministry of Finance, including Nigerian Society of Engineers, including COREN, including PPRA and all that. Then the road fund, the same thing. So the issue of funding roads, you can see in other places, the idea of driving a bill for the road sector started in 1971. At a point, the World Bank promised even to build headquarters for Nigeria if we're able to do this. People have also come to learn what we're doing here and gone back to have the federal roads bill passed in their own jurisdictions. So there is no way you can do roads without proper funding in Nigeria. Coming to the issue of how to fund roads, you see, the road fund bill is an amalgamation of all road user charges. Whether you are carrying overload, or we have weighing bridges that you can, whether it's tolling, whether it is other charges, whether it's people who are taking international routes, like, oh, you're a passenger traveling from here to other parts of Africa and all that, is you bring all this together to make sure that you use the user model for road funding. As you use, you pay.
Isn't that the same thing with toll gates? I mean, the same way we had toll gates before.
Yeah, that toll gate is just one of them. And of course,
there was a reason why toll gates were scrapped.
Nigeria was not, I mean, we are not the tolls were not intelligent then. They were manually operated. You come, you give receipt, nobody takes a check. Now you can do e-tolling. Now you can also, even if you want to do it manually, you have a CCTV there. Anybody who cheats, you collect I mean, you will know. And on the average, you know that you have about 50,000 vehicles passing on a road on each distance. When it drops dramatically, you begin to ask questions and you look at your CCTV.
When it never increases, what happens?
Of course, it will increase because the roads will be better.
But that's what I'm saying. What if it never increases? We have not seen a situation. I mean, we have had the committees oversighting.
Then you interrogate the process.
Have we ever seen an interrogation of that process?
Of course, we have. And that is why we devised these models and all the bills. In fact, the president has signed one, the Current Act. The road fund bill is about to go to him. The FRA bill, there were questions on it, and we've answered that because they returned it. And once you adopt this model, Nigerians should be able to pay for what they use because it is cheaper to do so. Do you know why? If you travel from here to Lokoja, the man hours you spend on the road, the potholes you experience, the wear and tear on your vehicle is quite huge. If you decide to pay for 4 hours in fuel to move your vehicle there, you might decide it's cheaper to pay for to take fuel for an hour, then along the line you pay tolls.
I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on public-private partnership, and why do we find it difficult to implement, especially at the federal level in Nigeria?
Well, is capacity. Most PPPs you have found in Nigeria, you find out that or even companies you sell. By the time you sell to them, the next thing is that they are going to the bank to borrow. So you have liabilities from takeoff point. But we did an investigation. You know, you are no second Niger bridge, Lagos is no longer trending. There had to be a legislative solution to it. There was a motion in Parliament, and we had to have a public hearing. We invited all the stakeholders. The Ministry of Works, which the minister was there. We invited by Courtney. We invited motorways. We invited infrastructure bank. We invited everybody, including Julius Berger, anybody who had any role to play in it. And we interrogated and asked questions. We found out that it could not work. And if you start a process, it couldn't work, government had to take back its responsibility.
Hold on, public-private partnerships don't work, or it will not work on those roads, or what exactly?
It couldn't work.
You're not giving any reason.
No,
why couldn't it work?
It couldn't work because there wasn't funding for them. The partners that we were choosing couldn't fund them. Both in second Niger bridge, government brought 30 billion. For close to 3-4 years, there was no corresponding funding.
Why are the partners finding funding difficult?
Well, the environment politically may be inclement. You understand? After the transition, in fact, we interacted with even the sovereign.
So there's government uncertainty.
There is uncertainty. It's volatile. It just has to be commercially viable.
So we still need to do something.
We need to do something, but that is one of the models with which you can fund roads. One is appropriation, which is not quite reliable because it doesn't come until government gets revenue. One is user pay model, which we are trying to cut with the road fund pay. Then the other one is PPP, which model we've tried. It couldn't work.
So, well, we'll be putting it out there to our viewers whether this user pay model will be working and what to expect from it in the next 4 years to see if it will actually cure the deficit we currently experience.
What we are asking the president is to sign the bill, and it will help because that should be the seed capital for road funding. Not appropriation. Appropriation should be interventionist.
Okay. It's definitely a fine place to leave it. Honorable Toby Okechukwu, thank you for coming on Hard Copy.
Thank you very much, Margaret.
Well, that's the program tonight. Your views and comments are always welcome. Do you think the user pay model, if signed into law, will work? You can send your comments to the address showing on your screen. Thank you for watching. I'm Okechukwu Yusuf. Good night.